You're listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series.
Supreme Court Judge David Ashton Lewis seems cool, calm and collected across from me this morning. Good morning, David.
Good morning to you. Of course, cool, calm and collected, because I'm in the hands of experts. I'm talking to one, but don't we have a special guest in the studio
we do
today? I want to say hello to Lynn from Mossman, because she asked to be recognised. No, but the other one is, and it's my beautiful son, Somerset, who's come all the way from the UK and is here for 3 months, and so you've just met him. So, Somerset, you're welcome. You can speak.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Somerset. I'm the judge. I'm David's second son, and it's lovely to meet you, Colin. Thank you so much for having me in the studio.
Oh, thank you. And he's always liked you, and even when he was in England, he'd say, David, isn't Colin good? Because he really balances you out, Dad.
Well, there might have been a few other choice words utilised.
Oh, well, no, he's a gentlemanly man, but something's just come across my mind too. And if you're listening, Judge Wall, Clive Wall, would you please contact the station? I've wanted to speak to you about your good work that we did a show on, but I have lost your phone contact number. So, Clive, if you are listening, would you please contact Colin, and we'll take it from there.
All right. Well, our topic of the day, we talked about a great many things. I'd told you something about I'd been yelling at the ABC through the radio for the last couple of days. I listened to a number of radio stations as just part of my duties to see what they sound like, what they're doing, and unfortunately the ABC seem to be the ABC of late, and we're in election mode and talking about nuclear reactors and all sorts of silly things. My latest tirade is last night they were saying, they were talking about nuclear once again, and a lady got up and said, I fear we might be trading one male-dominated industry for another. And that did it for me. I saw red, turned off the radio and thought, I need to have a calm evening.
No, good. And did you have a whiskey?
Anyway, no, not last
evening. You didn't?
No.
Colin calls a whiskey, and I like what he calls it, and I'm a whiskey drinker, and it helps the metal taste in my mouth because I'm still in remission. 4 years out, I've got to get to September next year with no return of the tumours, and they will tell me that I am healed. But one of the problems with radiation, and I'm sure there's many men and women out there who have been treated with chemotherapy and radiation who will know exactly what I'm saying about. 1, loss of taste. 2, this metallic taste in your mouth, and the only thing that eases it is a sip of whiskey. It gets rid of it for a couple of hours, but sometimes you can sip a bit too much, which I did yesterday, and thank heavens I was with Somerset because I started to feel unwell, and he drove, and we had a lovely day up at Mount Tamborine after having coffee with Lynn. So, all right, let's get to this topic. Now, we've talked about this.
I was going to just do a little bit of a preamble.
Yes, please.
Emmanuel Macron has famously called an election just before the Olympics.
Yes.
Part of the reason for that is that he is saying that a lot more people are siding with the right or signing up with right-wing political parties. And there seems to be a trend of this throughout Europe at this point in time. We were talking about left and right wings of aircraft and how the left wing is dipping a little lower than the right wing at the moment, David, and I'd love you to go into your monologue that you gave us yesterday.
Well, the left wing, of course, if it's dipping lower, it's dragging the aircraft to the left. And I had someone say to me, and I won't name them, I've known this person for years, and they are educated, balanced, fair-minded, and are a Liberal voter, coalition voter, and said what he has noticed, that the left has been so dominant that now the centre is being pulled over to the left, and he's now considered to be a fascist. Now, anyone who understands fascism, you're looking at one-party police states with secret police and extrajudicial courts like the Nazi courts who just applied Nazi-biased law. And so when he said to me, I'm now considered, because that centre has moved, but it raises a bigger issue that is really difficult in modern democracies. The US is facing it now. Australia's a bit behind, but will face it. And that is, you've got people on the left who just say, look, we're a lone small voice in the wilderness. Everything is right-wing. Now, I've had people say that to me, and I've said, do you watch the ABC? And they've nodded and said yes. And then I've said, so you think the ABC is basically right-wing? And I've had this yes, it is. I listened to former Labor Senator Stephen Conroy yesterday speak about the award of the Companion of Australia Order to Daniel Andrews. One of, in my opinion, and I stress, ladies and gentlemen, it's my opinion, he was one of the most failed premiers. Under his watch, 800 people died. This botched hotel accommodation, he was a failure, yet he won 3 elections. So there were those who just said, well, he's brilliant. Now, and I heard others say, look, these awards, these royal awards, they are awards for civilian people mainly. You know, people who serve the community well, you know, people who've invented or won a Nobel Prize for something. And that's basically right, but it doesn't mean that those awards can't be given to government. But as I heard one government senator say, well, they shouldn't be awarded to us. We get paid, and paid very well, to do our jobs.
Yes.
And so this is the job we have to do. He did nothing more than his job, and this particular person said, and he did it badly, really badly. Now, that's for you out there to decide, but I think probably he wouldn't be held up as one of the most successful and greatest premiers of one Australian state since the war. But one of the difficulties, and this is what I fear, Colin, you've got people on the left who say, and this senator, his name is Stephen Conroy, and he was in the parliament, I think, from 1996 until the end of Tony Abbott's prime ministership. And he's a typical, responsible Labor man. Now, he's the man who really mucked up the NBN. You know, he claimed it, and the cost just blew out $90 billion to have every home joined to the NBN. And then Malcolm Turnbull comes in after it, says, I'm going to fix it. And he ended up paying $90-odd billion to run the NBN to the node on the telephone pole, and then using these old telephone cables. Well, we all know what that was like. And so what's happening now? Now, in Australia, they've gone back to joining each individual house, which is what Stephen Conroy wanted to do initially. Now, here's one of the sadnesses of politics. But what my point was, I listened to Stephen Conroy yesterday, and I think any person he just said that Daniel Andrews was the most deserving man, and we are in the thrall of right-wingism in Australia. Well, how can we be in the thrall of right-wingism since Anthony Albanese and the current government, he was a member of the Young Socialists as a young man. He's a decent man. So you listen to people of the left persuasion saying how sad it is Australia has become a right-wing fascist state. You're joking. And then you listen to the right, you know, the right of centre saying, we're being pulled to the left and we're becoming a socialist nation. Well, we're becoming neither.
No.
We're not becoming fascist. We're not becoming socialist. And I'll express this now. This is my view. I'm not saying that anyone else has to follow it, but I'm not a dill, and I've perceived in my life, really, even though we've had liberal governments since 1945, I've perceived, using my intellect, that, and more so since Gough Whitlam, 1972, the country and all the emphasis tends to be on the left, and I've spoken about the Jeffies, that is the left We're the people who care about justice, equity, fairness and inclusion. And I call them the Jeffies. And my response to people when I've been speaking about that, and you think John Howard wasn't concerned about justice, equity, fairness and inclusion, and you think Scott Morrison wasn't. And I've had some answers. No, they weren't. They were just interested in right-wing moving. And I've thought, oh, good heavens, where do we go in our country, an educated country? Where do we go with the right thinking that of the left and the left thinking that of the right?
So let's take right and left out. Let's take Liberal and Labor out.
Yes.
Let's boil it down to the original preface. The purpose of government is to manage the country on our behalf.
And I'll tell you, John Stuart Mill, in his book on utility, written in the 1840s, the father of modern liberal parliamentary democracy, of which we've all, even America, which is a congressional system, and the role of government is to secure the peace, the order, and the welfare of the citizenry. Now, when one party starts saying, yes, we can secure better peace, better order, and our welfare system is so much better, I laud the left of centre bringing in Medicare. Look, Somerset sitting here, he will be returning to the United States after 2 years in England and 3 months here, because fortunately my children hold Australian citizenship, US citizenship and British.
So they can never be Prime Minister.
And he can never be president. And so he can be Prime Minister in Australia, but he can't be Prime Minister in England.
Yes.
And so, look, the thing is, we really need to take a good look at what our forefathers built. Somerset and I have been talking about the generation of his grandfather, my father, that unique generation that stood up in 1939 to 3 different forms of absolute one-party state evil and said no. And I'm just finishing a book now on the US Air Force in 1943-44 over Germany. The average age of a B-17 bomber, those were the American bombers, crew of 10, carried half the bomb load of a Lancaster. Somerset's grandfather was a 23-year-old Lancaster pilot. They and the Americans flew during the day. The average age of the crew in a B-17 was 20. And yet they got up every day.
Hang on. The interesting part is why.
Yeah, the perfect question. And why? Because they believed that their society was worth preserving. And I've said it before on this show. You can cure a communist or a fascist of one-party right or left-wingism, but you can never cure a man of freedom.
Sure.
When a man tastes freedom, he will never turn back. And the only form of government for all its troubles is the form of liberal, congressional or parliamentary democracy for all its problems. We have the young generation now saying socialism. And then you say, but everywhere it was tried, it didn't work. And what do you get hit with? Oh, but they didn't do it properly. And so my question has then been, so how is it done properly? It's faulted by the fact for socialism it's got to be a one-party state.
The readings read very, very well. They sound wonderful.
Oh, they do.
And they pour a lovely potion in your ear, but then you've got to add the human spirit.
You do.
And
Look,
and that's the issue.
We all know Christians. I'm a Christian. And I love when I read the Bible, or particularly the New Testament, and I see magnificent. The one challenge facing a Christian or a Jew, I'll leave a Muslim out of it at the moment, the one challenge facing them is now translate this into everyday life where you've sinned or you've thought evil or you've misbehaved or you've done wrong. And that's the great challenge. And socialism, as you quite rightly say, and how many people, I've read Marx,
yes.
5 volumes of Capital. It's the most difficult treatises, thick volumes. I've never yet met a socialist who said, oh, I have 2.
Right, well, that's an interesting point.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like how many Christians have read the Bible from verse 1, chapter 1, Genesis, to the last verse, last chapter in Revelation. I've not met very many. And so without being arrogant, and I've read the Bible through twice, and it's a hard slog, but it's worth it because it makes you realize the difference between what is said and the difference between what people have done over 5,000, 3,000 years of putting it into practice is huge.
Indeed, mate, it is indeed. So going back to politics, we're steaming up towards a state election and a federal one in a year or so's time as well, and you can see that we're talking about nuclear and the big problems with the country, and we seem to want to soil those arguments with all sorts of other
pejorative
smokescreens. Yeah, smokescreens, for want of a better word. The problem I often find is the two parties are so busy arguing against one another and
trying to get into government.
Yelling at the wind to a point.
Yes, good point.
And some of the arguments are absolutely ludicrous. But that's the thing. If this is great for the country, no, we've got to be the polar opposite. We can't ever hear, that's a great idea.
Do you know the difficulty in this? See, if you go to a LNP member and say, and to a Labor, your first duty is not to your jolly party. Your first duty is to the governance of the people of Queensland.
Sure.
To govern them in peace, order, welfare, and on their behalf. Now, what a member of Stephen Miles's cabinet would say is, well, yes, we agree with that. That's what we're doing. And Mr. Crisafulli, who is the leader of the alternative government, and that's what we're doing.
Sure.
And then what really they need to be told, but you're not.
That's right.
The both of you being so one-eyed on the Liberal National Party or on the Labor Party as being the only parties who can deliver peace, order, welfare and good government means you can't.
So there's some very, very big problems that we're hearing that both parties are going to conquer. There's power issues.
Yes.
We have
cost of living.
We have youth crime and youth violence. We have domestic violence. We have problems with the family law system. And these are huge problems.
They are.
We sit there and hear from the Liberal Party and even the Labor Party to a point, we're going to fix them, we're going to do this. And often when you get down to the minutiae or the nitty-gritty, looks like a Band-Aid to me.
And a Band-Aid that will fall off pretty quickly.
Sure.
Now, we've had examples in both the First World War and the Second World War of what was called unity governments. Winston Churchill brought in Clement Attlee, later to be the leader of the Labor Party that ousted Churchill in early 1945. Churchill was not there to celebrate the surrender of Germany on May the 8th, 1945, if I'm correct. If I'm wrong, please correct me. And the same, so they formed governments of national unity, the whole basis being we are in such a crisis that all the right brains just are not on, in Britain's case, the Conservative Party, or all the right brains are not in the Labor Party. So what they tended to do, well, they did it. They brought the best brains together in what was called a National Unity Cabinet, because what they were saying, Nazi Germany and this dreadful world war we're facing is bigger than party politics. We have to now be united as a people, regardless of whether you're slightly left or slightly right. Your first concern is the welfare of this country.
Yes.
And by 1945, Britain was, other than the V2 bombs that were flying rockets, were flying, which were terrible, but they never threatened like the Battle of Britain 4 years before. So I think we're moving towards, if we have the gumption and the courage to have some unity governments in Australia, so whoever wins the next election, accepting that all brains and all talent doesn't just rely on the Liberal side or the Labor side. We need to pull into a cabinet the best of everything, because now more than ever, the welfare, good government, good order of Australia is important, and particularly with the rise of China, and we're spending billions to eventually acquire, 11, I think, no, 13 nuclear-powered submarines, and 5 of those are going to be the Ace Predator that the US Navy think this great Virginia-class submarine, which is deadly.
Yes, it is. It's
and
amazing.
so when you've got these potential threats in the world, and you're hearing it from every quarter, aren't you, now that we're closer to World War III than ever, and I think there's justification in that.
Sure.
So now is time to stop being divided by politics and left-wingism, right-wingism, and don't call someone who's just left of centre, oh, you're a commo. Or don't call someone who's just right of centre, oh, you're a fascist. No. You're an Australian.
It's not helpful. At the end of the day, it's very much like you're racist. Whenever you an opposing argument to what the Aboriginals want or need, you're a racist.
Or if you're uncomfortable with Islam, well, you've got Islamophobia. And there's enough evidence of what certain elements of Islam have done over the last 20 years in Western countries. That's not to say that all Muslims would do that, but don't accuse someone, as you're quite right. And then when someone says, look, I'm a little bit worried about the LGBTQI whatever, well, you're a homophobe. Well, no, I'm not.
What are you worried about is the question. You can't catch it.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, though, so you're saying the only way you could be satisfied, Mr. LGBTQI, is no one questions anything about it, just accepts your view of it. Mr. Muslim, the only way you would not categorise someone as Islamophobia is they just accept what you say. Well, in the West, we developed from the mid-1600s on, well, the 1500s, we developed the rise of intellectual pursuit, and that involves questioning.
Yes.
That involves analysing.
Look, the old days of debating, you went through it, David, I'm sure, at uni and so forth, and they're great, but at times, if you don't put them in perspective, it's like what I've been listening to with the ABC and some of those examples I used earlier up. You're just wasting time in solving a problem.
You are. Well, can I just interrupt? You said you're just wasting time in solving. You're very kind, because you can't and are not solving. Once you get into polemics, left-wing polemics against right-wing polemics against left, what you're doing is going round in circles, and you're not even addressing how is this solved.
Correct. Look, one of the great ones that I remember just was an exercise in I wouldn't call it a waste of time, but it was a great example. It was the argument that the Negroes of America were owed $2-point-something trillion in wages that they weren't paid when they were tending cotton fields. And the opposing side of the argument was a great debate, and it all summed up in the end that in conclusion, the guys who were saying, well, we can't pay it, got up and said, well, I'd dearly love to give you your $2 trillion, but at the end of the day, my grandfather had his wallet stolen in Dachau. Yeah. And at the end of... Great argument. We are here and we're here, and this is what happened in the past, and this is what happened in the past. We can just deal with what's here today.
It's virtue signalling.
Yeah, we can deal with what's here today, not what happened in the past. Let's learn from that.
And just before we do stop, and you've raised, and so what's here today is the 28 million African Americans who were not born into slavery, but they've quite rightly raised, let's talk about what happened between 1608, when the first African slaves were brought to Jamestown, and up to, really, 1865, the end of the Civil War. Because over that period of time, one section of the human race, called African Americans, were treated appallingly. Absolutely. So how should this be approached in 2024? And don't just yell compensation. Don't just yell, you're not getting $1.
Let's recognise it, let's learn from it, and let's ensure that it never, ever happens again.
Yeah, and if there can be an appropriate response to the African Americans who'd lived between 1608 and 1865 and are now dead. Is there Is there a response? Rather than one side yelling down another side. And so when I look at Oprah Winfrey and I look at all the African American NFL football stars, they seem to be doing all right in a land that is told is unfair and unkind. And unfairness exists in all human society.
Sure.
Anyway, I think we're running out of time.
We are. David, you can sum up.
Well, I think you've raised a tremendous topic on this, and it really is, let's stop running into camps. We have to run to the centre. And if you're an American, it's the Stars and Stripes, the US flag. I don't want to keep hearing about the bad things the Americans have done. I don't want to be blind-fed with all the good things they've done. But you don't hear much about the Marshall Plan in Europe that the American taxpayer between 1946 rebuilt bombed-out Germany. Their taxes did it, called the Marshall Plan.
Sure.
How many modern Americans of my son's age even know about the Marshall Plan? So I think to move us to the centre, we have to, where we get rid of party, we have to do one thing. We have to be prepared to do what Winston Churchill said in 1956 when he gave a valedictory address at Eton, and he'd retired from politics then. He was asked by a prefect, what's the most important advice you can give to us young people in 1956 ready to go on to university out in the world? And Churchill said, oh, that's very easy. Read history. History, history, and history, because it will humble you.
Indeed.
Yep.
Indeed. All right, David Ashen-Lewis, thank you very much for your time again this morning. We went round and round, and I think we came up with some great ideas.
Well, I think we've got some ideas, but it's up to others more than us to put them into, if there's any validity in them. And I would just say goodbye to Miss Vico. I would say goodbye to Somerset. So thank you for joining us, Somerset. And he's sitting in the chair over from me smiling, so I hope we haven't bored him.
All right, until next week.
Yes, thank you, Colin.
You've been listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series. Support local online content and become a financial supporter today at 4CRB.com.